am joined by a registered nutritionist, owner of the London Centre for Intuitive Eating and author of Just Eat It. We have Laura Thomas.
Hey, good to see you.
Well, thank you so much for joining me and just, letting us have this conversation. If you haven't read Train Happy, Laura wrote a fantastic piece in there for us about why diets don't work. And in the book we also discussed intuitive eating, so you were the perfect person to have on to have this bit of a deeper dive into those topics.
I'm Tally, no pressure.
I know, well, I just thought it would be a great opportunity to pick your brain, to discuss some of the issues and the questions that people may have reading. I'm sure with your book people had a lot of questions, and I have a feeling that may happen too, so I wanted to talk to you about those things. So let's start with how you kind of label yourself, should we say. So we've got terms such as anti-diet, fat positive, HAES aligned kind of nutritionists and personal trainers like myself.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like if this is new information to you, these words feel quite intimidating. They feel a bit out there. For me, it was almost like took a little time to even say them myself and say that, I'm this, I'm that. And so let's discuss what those words mean and why you choose to use them. So let's start with anti-diet, because that's the kind of I feel like the buzzword at the moment.
Yeah, and I suppose I'm not sure that I necessarily label myself that way, but some people might, and I guess if pushed about it, I would say, yeah, okay, I'm anti-diet. And you're right, I think that is a fairly intimidating term for people to come across. And so essentially what it's referring to is not being anti people who are on diets or people who want to pursue weight loss, and we'll talk, I'm sure, about why that's not always the best idea for people sometimes in just a second. But what anti-diet is referring to is anti-diet culture, or anti the intentional pursuit of weight loss, because we know that it can be damaging for people, and it tends to be the default medical recommendation, health recommendation, and we know that it's not always possible for people, so it can cause people to get stuck in the diet cycle, where they're kind of jumping on and off the dieting bandwagon, which might have implications for both their physical and their mental health. So when we are saying we're anti-diet, we don't necessarily mean that we are anti-health, although that's a slightly nuanced conversation as well. But if an anti-diet nutritionist or dietitian, what we might do is help people manage their health conditions or understand their health conditions through a non-weight focused lens. So we're taking the pressure off of weight and helping them improve health through other avenues, if that's what they want to do or choose to do.
Yeah, I always found the term anti-diet quite confronting and a bit, I felt like if you're anti something, it feels like you're against it, and sometimes I wanted to say what I was for rather than what I was against, in a positive way, which is why I always said I choose to be, I say like a health first personal trainer, in the sense that I'm going to think about your mental and physical health as my priority, rather than, as you said, that weight focus.
Yeah.
But I absolutely would say that I support the anti-diet movement, and I totally support it. I think for people who perhaps are dieting right now or still are contemplating that option, it feels like an attack sometimes. It can feel scary,
Sure.
but as you said, it isn't.
Yeah.
It is just a term. It's about not promoting dieting and instead focusing on your overall well-being.
Yeah, and so I would tend to use the words body inclusive when it comes to describing my professional label. I don't know. And all that means really is that I'm not going to say that there's something wrong with your body or you need to shrink your body. I'm helping you work with your body rather than against it. But yes, to speak to this point around sort of, I think there's a real sentiment at the moment that the anti-diet movement is shaming or judging people. And I just want to say, for the record, I mean, I've said it before, and I'm sure I'll have to say it again, but it's not really about individuals. It's about acknowledging that diet culture is a system of oppression. We're just going to go there.
Go there.
But it's, it's an extension of a power structure that aims to keep certain marginalized people down, notably fat bodies, but other intersecting identities as well. And so, you'll read how diet culture is essentially an extension of a white supremacist patriarchal system of oppression, to throw around a lot of big words. And so really what we're rallying against is the ways that diet culture harm people and keep people down. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And it does feel intimidating, and if you're new to this work, I get you, because I felt so, it's taken me like little by little, step by step, to kind of dig deeper into this work and understand, its origins and where it comes from. So let's talk about the term fat positive, because that kind of relates to that, how you mentioned that diet culture is a form of oppression, and particularly to those in bigger bodies. So let's talk about what it means to be fat positive.
Yeah, so again, I was actually listening to a really wonderful conversation on Fiona Sutherland's podcast the other day. And one thing that stood out to me was that really, as a health at every size aligned practitioner,
That's another one we're going to do.
I know, we'll come back to that. Side note. But yeah, as someone who's HAES aligned, it's not really up to me to label myself as fat positive. It's really up to the marginalized group that I'm trying to ally myself with to decide whether or not I'm fat positive and I kind of meet that standard. I would love to think that I am fat positive, but ultimately I sort of have to do well by those people that I'm trying to serve in order to sort of earn that title, as it were. So again, I would try and align myself as being body inclusive, and I'm constantly working on my understanding of that and evolving that. So I suppose if we think about the traditional dominant nutrition dogma, is that fat is bad, fat is unhealthy, fat is unworthy. If you're fat, you shouldn't be allowed to exist or take up space. And so essentially, if you're fat positive, I think you're rejecting that dogma, but also working to uplift fat bodies who have been marginalized, again, through the sort of, we'll use nutrition as an example because I'm a nutritionist, but through the sort of nutrition and medical establishment where people have, further marginalized fat bodies. So to be fat positive is to reject that and say, actually, no, we need to be doing what we can to bring these people, to lift them up rather than to keep oppressing them. Absolutely.
And I think this does feel overwhelming, and like I said, if this is new information, take your time with it, sit with it, read, listen to Laura's podcast, because it takes a lot to kind of comprehend. I'd say the biggest education, as you said, is listening to those voices that have been marginalised for so long. Absolutely. And they're the best people to learn from. As an example, I think your fat friend, who is on
Amazing.
Instagram and Twitter and writes essays and great pieces, is so informative and clear in their opinion. And so I think we need to listen to those conversations, and even just by following their account and the stories they share on Instagram stories as an example of just other people's lived experience is so powerful, and it really gets gives you a kind of sense of this work and how it applies, I think, to real life as well.
Yeah, I think it's really important to say that, I can't speak to the fat experience, and I wouldn't want to take up that space, so I would definitely signpost to someone like your fat friend. Something that I find really interesting is she'll occasionally do a Twitter thread asking people about their experiences of accessing medical care in particular, and all of the ways that people have been, and I suppose this just highlights the marginalisation and oppression we were talking about, just to give examples of the way that people have been, gone to their doctor because they have X, Y, and Z symptoms and have just been told to lose weight when it turns out that they have cancer or something, equally devastating. And so it just goes to show that every health concern, more or less, that people in bigger bodies experience is often just chalked up to their weight. So that's a really nice, clear example of medicalized fat phobia, so a form of marginalization that we were talking about.
For me, fat phobia is the hatred and the oppression of fat bodies and all that is synonymous with that in, coming at it from that diet culture perspective. And I understand weight stigma to be how that's manifested in more of a medical field, perhaps in research, and that would be more of the terminology used in that kind of academic setting.
Yeah.
But they are very linked.
Yeah, and again, not wanting to speak to the lived experience of this, I can speak certainly from an academic perspective and from the experiences that a lot of my clients have shared with me. But Charlotte Cooper, who is another rad fatty, would say that weight stigma is a politification of the term fat phobia. So it's essentially the same thing, but we've made it palatable and digestible and not so confronting.
Yeah.
So that's what Charlotte Cooper would say, and I have to say I think I agree with her. But I think fat phobia could be manifested in a lot of different ways. So it could be very overt harassment and prejudice kind of lobbied at an individual. But we also see it as being very institutionalized. So, for example, so something that we talk about in our trainings is weight stigma levied at children. So, or fat phobia levied at children. And yeah, I saw your face there because it's horrifying, but children, did you know that weight-based bullying and teasing was one of the highest forms of bullying in schools? So more so than any other, it's all horrible, don't get me wrong, but it's the most common,
I think because something that's appearance-based,
yes,
seems
it's easy
like
to
an
target.
easy target, and I sadly am not surprised.
Yeah.
Which is sad because I get the brain of children in the sense that when I was a kid, what you saw is if something looked different to you, it felt like it was a target. Yeah,
so a really important reminder to talk for any parents listening, to talk to their kids about how diversity and difference between people is really normal. Because here's the kicker with the weight-based bullying and teasing thing. So for every incident of bullying and teasing that was related to weight that a child encountered, they were 5% less likely to attend school. Yeah. Wow. So can you imagine how that accumulates over time? If every time you were bullied based on your weight, the chance of you going to school reduced by 5%, and then another 5%, and then another 5%. So that's one thing. And then the other thing that always sticks in my mind is this statistic that kids who are bullied because of their weight are twice as likely to commit suicide. Yeah.
Just heartbreaking.
It's horrible. So when I know we were throwing around marginalization and oppression before, that's the manifestation of it. Those are the consequences of it, or the way that it materializes.
Yeah.
But it's not just in children. It's through education, employment. It shows up in all sorts of different walks of life. Somebody who's really great to do a bit more reading around this is Sophie Hagen, and reading
Yes.
her book Happy Fat is fantastic.
Yes. And I remember her saying on a panel once that she used some research, and it was, I'm going to try and say this correctly, that there was I think it was a survey done or some sort of research done on students, I believe, and they were asked, would you rather be blind or would you rather be fat for the rest of your life? And the majority of people chose to be blind because they felt that being fat was the worst thing.
Yeah, it's pretty startling.
It's pretty horrifying. It's just, it's very, it's hard.
So deeply entrenched, and when we, you know, if we kind of go back to what we started talking about, which was this idea that, you know, I guess in some ways it's really understandable why people want to try and control their weight and try and control their body size through dieting and manipulating their bodies in other ways, because the reality is that we treat fat people in our society really, really poorly, just, you know, in the same way that we're treating other marginalized groups really poorly. And so we have a lot to do, especially if we consider ourselves to be allies to the well, just social justice movements in general.
So, as I mentioned at the beginning, in Train Happy, you gave a really great overview of why diets don't work. We get, like I said, it was an overview, and there's a lot of information and science behind this stuff. But I thought we could kind of get into it a little bit and discuss why diets are so unsuccessful, why we get stuck in that diet cycle, and where the statistics of the 95% failure rate come from. And is that accurate? And is it more? Is it less? Let's discuss.
Okay. So I think it's helpful to talk about just the broader context here, because I think oftentimes we assume, based on what diet culture teaches us and you know how prevalent diets are and the way that they make them sound really easy and straightforward, it makes it seem as though diets are under our own control, right? Like we have total say over what size and shape our bodies are, and if we just, you know, do this little calories in, calories out equation, we can kind of nail that, right? But what we know from the scientific literature and research is that there are over 100 different variables that play into what someone's body weight and shape will be. Most of those are outside of our own individual control. So this is things like our socioeconomic status, our genetics and biology, our psychology to some extent, shapes our body shape and size. So these things are not things that we can readily change. So we have to kind of keep the bigger picture in mind here. But then there is a lot going on in terms of our own individual biology as well. So what happens when, well, let's just kind of describe the diet cycle. I'm sure a lot of people will be familiar with it. But if we start at the top, people are like excited, it's January, they're going to start this new diet, they've heard about this new, I don't know,
app,
like,
there's a new app out, I won't name it, but there's an app that's a lifestyle, not a diet.
But it's a diet.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, we need to watch out, because diet culture is sneaky and it just rebrands itself as not diet, but it's still diet. So you start this new diet, like maybe you're really excited about it, you join like the Facebook groups and you get the book and you do all of the things, and you might start off by kind of restricting a couple of food groups, or the total number of calories that you're doing or eating, I should say. Maybe it's macros, maybe you just wiped out a whole food group, and so you start off by restricting your food in some way. And then it kind of like, if we imagine, I'm imagining the little diagram in my book. So we get down to it. What all of those things do is further ingrain what we call diet mentality. So you probably experienced this if you've ever been on a diet. It's the kind of bargaining and negotiating and back and forth that you have with yourself about good foods and bad foods, and
If I do this on a Monday morning, it means I can go out on a Friday night, and if I go do that workout, I can have this, and that
totally, like
mentality.
saying to yourself, oh, I can make up for this, or I can earn this way, but also just like the guilt and the shame associated with eating particular foods, or not meeting a target, or overshooting a target, or whatever it might be. And it's interesting, in clinic, one of the first things I get clients to do is to fill out this sort of brain template that we have. So we have this empty brain template, and I ask clients to say what proportion of their brain or their headspace is taken up by thoughts of food and diet and exercise and their body when they're doing a program like this. And some of them will tell me it's like 80, 90% sometimes. Like, it's a lot. So that's the diet mentality. And I think with every turn of the diet cycle, that gets more and more deeply entrenched. So I've noticed with my clients who've been on diets for years and years and years that stuff's just more deeply ingrained than if you've only kind of casually dabbled in diets. So there's that. And then what we might notice initially is a little bit of weight loss. So maybe a couple pounds here and there. Sometimes that's enough to kind of keep us going and get us excited. And sometimes people don't notice any weight loss at all, so they double down on their diet and they go harder. But then this is the point that our biology starts to kick in. And our bodies can't really perceive the difference between being in an energy deficit because we're on a diet versus an energy deficit because food is scarce, or there's a shortage of food. You know, we're mammals at the end of the day, so our reptilian brain kind of takes over and is like, okay, well, we need to get up off of our ass and go get some food. So it dials up your hunger signals, it dials up your cravings for specific foods, and that your kind of your threshold is down, or your tolerance is down, and you're like, oh, there's a KFC on my way home. Or you've just had a stressful day, kind of a shitty day, and you're like, fuck it. Am I allowed to swear on the podcast? Okay, this is kind of my brand.
I know.
So yeah, you're like, fuck it, and I'm just gonna order all the food. And you find yourself kind of, I would say, sort of feeling out of control around food. Like food kind of owns you a little bit, and I think at that point, oftentimes people can blame themselves and say, I've got no willpower, I'm weak, all of these, all the horrible things we tell ourselves.
They beat themselves up, like, why couldn't I stick to it? Why did I have to do that? Like, it's my fault, I'm a terrible person, I messed up.
But it's actually because our bodies are sending out hormones and neurotransmitters that are sort of, in some ways, trying to tell us that,
feed me.
Yeah, well, it's sort of like evolutionary survival, right? And the other thing that can happen if we are trying to restrict our calorie intake is not only does our appetite increase, but our metabolic rate decreases just a little bit, but enough that you would potentially notice a slow in weight loss, or even your weight increasing back up. Your thyroid hormones go down, your fullness hormones go down, so it's harder for you to feel full when you're restricting. I mean, it makes sense, right? When you think about it, it makes total sense. And so that, that's maybe the point that you break the diet and you put a little bit of weight back on, and then you're back at the beginning, right back at square one. And that cycle can play out over the space of a day, over the space of a week, that whole diet starts Monday thing, or over a couple of months, or sometimes even over a couple of years. So the time frame might be slightly different for everyone, but it's a very clear pattern.
It is, and I think I've seen commentary from people in the fitness industry who I think have had their feathers a bit ruffled from these people saying that, diets don't work long term and they're not sustainable, and
You're looking at me.
and there's a lot of people that saying, it wasn't that I've heard people say all these people in the anti-diet movement just can't diet, they're just not very good, and that's why they're mad. and that's why they are saying that diets don't work. But guess what, Laura? If you do their plan, you'll be fine.
Oh, it's
Because if you
different.
just do that, that's the answer. Of course.
Well, if only science had figured that out before
I
they
know.
did.
If only all the researchers still currently trying to find the most perfect form of magic bullet weight loss, form of weight loss would just hang up their lab coat now. Like, your job's done. This personal trainer figured it out.
And I think that's the thing that we have to remember when we're having these conversations is this idea that the fact that diets don't work and long-term weight loss maintenance, to use the kind of scientific term, is very, very difficult, is not controversial in nutritional science.
It's not.
Like, ask anyone with a nutrition or dietetics degree, like, we'll tell you.
Yeah.
The disconnect is that we're like, yeah, we know that diets are really hard and they don't work, but just try it anyway.
Yeah, just try the healthy behaviours for weight loss.
Yeah.
And as you said, it's kind of commonly known in the nutrition space that diets don't work. So we'll say that diets where you count points or you have sins or you're tracking it
Shakes
they don't work. That's kind of everyone I think is on pretty much everyone's on the same place when we say like detox teas or fad diets, they don't work.
Mm-hmm.
But there is that grey area where people can say, yeah, but even though we don't have a long-term, a study or, a group of studies, we don't have that wider body of evidence to say that there is a version where we can sustain long-term weight loss.
Mm-hmm.
We're still saying that we can do weight management and we can encourage that. And I just personally don't get it. I don't get why we're still trying to push something when do we have a way? Is there evidence?
I guess two things on that. First of all, there are some people who will be successful dieting. Fiona Willer talks about the statistical unicorns, that small fraction of people who go on a diet and actually it does work and it doesn't necessarily come with the physical or the psychological downside that for most people it does. But what we don't know is if those people were above their set point weight to begin with. So that's research that we still kind of have to have more of a look at. I kind of half joking about, there is one form of permanent weight loss that I could offer you that's evidence-based.
Go on.
Bariatric surgery.
Yeah.
So that is really the only solution that we have that is kind of guaranteed to help people lose weight, and even then it's unclear how much weight, and also there are massive long-term complications. It's really not, I say it half jokingly, but also it's a really, really serious thing.
And even then, do we know that those people could have the weight loss after surgery and in 10, 15, 20 years' time maintain that? Do we know that?
I'm not sure what the specific evidence is around that, but my sort of understanding, and don't quote me on this, but my understanding is that oftentimes people will have quite a steep initial weight loss, but then over time they might end up putting at least some of the weight back on. Yeah.
And when we're talking about weight loss maintenance, because I read a blog post from a psychologist, I think it was, about this, talking about the evidence for weight loss maintenance, and I was really curious because I was like, this is really interesting. And I clicked on it, and I think the study referred to those who maintain weight loss would have preoccupation with food and have to monitor their bodies for long term. So whether they would go through periods of monitoring, tracking food potentially, and would have to regularly weigh themselves and would have to pay very close attention to everything they're eating, everything they're doing, would sacrifice social plans. This was all in the research, put in very researchy language, but it was all there. And to me, that was describing my disordered relationship with food that I had. that I couldn't maintain because I had no life, and it became all-consuming, and it was something that meant that I had a smaller body, but I did not have a life to go with it.
You had a smaller life as well.
I had a massively smaller life. Well, that's a contradiction itself, but I had a smaller life. Significantly smaller life. And that was really interesting to me, that was a like, we can do long-term weight loss providing you're willing to essentially be on a diet for the rest of your life.
But providing you're willing to engage in disordered eating, if not eating disorder behaviours.
Yeah, and that's sadly normalised.
Very normalised in diet culture. Yeah, that's kind of...
It's normalised in...
It's what I see every single day in this very room.
Yeah. So, I was really frustrated with that, and I felt like it was important to bring that up, because I think when we do see often, I don't want to say point fingers at people, because I'm thinking of hypothetical people in my mind, but when we're thinking of those people that perhaps we do know that did go on a diet, lose weight, we don't, or you see those before and after pictures online, we do not know the mentality during that time. We do not know the where that person was at, after, what it took to get that, because we don't know the full story, and as much as that before and after looks really attractive, because it's like, oh wow, they did it looks so easy for them, like we don't know the sacrifice they had to go through and get that.
It's that whole kind of compare and despair thing, and I say this to my clients all the time when they say, oh, so and so has done this and they've lost this weight and blah blah blah, and I'll say, well, we don't know if they have an exercise addiction, we don't know if they have an eating disorder, we don't know if they have an illness, we don't know what else might be going on in their lives, that it could be a mental health thing. Like, there are so many reasons why people might have lost weight, but because in our society it's kind of blanketly praised, we don't actually stop and reflect, okay, what else might be going on here? Could this be a signal that something isn't quite right for this person?
It was really interesting in my own personal experience when I lost a lot of weight through basically controlling everything I ate and did. It was a weird combination of some people thinking like, hang on, you're okay, but there was a lot of praise.
Yeah.
There was a lot of praise, and there was a lot of thinking like, good on you, you just love healthy eating, and you love cooking, and and I shared a lot of it on social media, so social media was like, hey, we'll validate that. Like, the likes and the follows and everything at the time was very validating to what I was doing. And what I was doing was role modelling what I was following online, which is like this vicious cycle of, I wanted to be healthy. I saw healthy as controlling stuff and tracking stuff and, engaging in behaviours that I now realise were disordered. But it was very normalised as that's just what fit and healthy people did, and that there didn't seem to be another option. When I, years later, through my own kind of, my own process of unlearning and challenging myself and trying to get myself back to a neutral, healthy relationship with food and exercise, I discovered intuitive eating, and I discovered your work, and it was so transformative for me personally, and it was the piece of the puzzle that just made everything make sense. And it was kind of a framework that put all my confusion and all of my almost like anger about what I had done and why I had done those things, it all made it all make sense, and really kind of fast tracked my personal healing. And so I thought it would also be a great opportunity to talk about intuitive eating and discuss the principles and kind of work through them. In the book, I had a dietitian, and she's a personal trainer, Jessie Haggerty, run us through the principles of intuitive eating, and we discussed what a normal relationship, quote, normal relationship with food looks like. And that was just a little introduction. So I felt like this is an opportunity to kind of delve perhaps a little bit deeper into that. So I know that you call the principles slightly different terminology, but I've gone...
It's the same thing.
Yeah, they are. I've gone by the Evelyn Tribbley, Elise Fresh words, but I thought we could run through them. So let's start with reject the diet mentality. I know we've touched on that phrase, but what does that mean in the context of intuitive eating?
Yeah, so there are kind of a couple of different layers to it, and I think part of it is that sort of intellectual, rational understanding of why diets don't work and all the things I said before about the biology that's at play, and we're kind of working against our bodies, and ultimately it causes problems for both our psychological and our physical health. So we know that people who diet are much more likely to develop an eating disorder. We know that restriction can lead to like muscle wasting, for example, and loss of muscle mass. There are tons of kind of side effects, if you will, of dieting. So having, I guess, an intellectual understanding of that first of all, but then also being able to understand your own experiences of dieting and kind of what it was that you were hoping to get out of that versus the reality of that, and maybe the sacrifices or the price that you've paid for that personally. So kind of like you were talking about putting together that puzzle. It's about beginning to recognize that diet mentality, the bargaining and negotiating that we talked about, and being able to, first of all, acknowledge that and have awareness that it's there, and then begin to challenge it and undo it a little bit. And then getting rid of dieting tools where possible, and in a way that feels safe and comfortable for you. So oftentimes we use like MyFitnessPal or like a Fitbit or something like that.
Fitness trackers.
What is that thing? So yeah, using those things as a way of kind of feeling like we're okay, as something external to us, validating what we're doing. And so we kind of almost need to learn how to build that internally, knowing that we're okay. So that's, all of the principles sound like 10 principles, yeah, easy, but then you blow up each principle, and there's a lot to it.
Yeah, it's not like, right, step 1, do this, step 2, do that. It's very much, okay, my understanding is we start with rejecting the diet mentality, and we really have to spend some time there, probably, because look, if you've done, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 diets, that's a lot of stuff to kind of get your head around and unpick. And so it's not necessarily an overnight process.
No.
And it's going to vary depending on each person's experience.
Totally. I always say that intuitive eating is an iterative process. You might kind of dabble with some of the principles and then be like, and then go back to an earlier principle. And in fact, I see that happening time and time again in clinic. We go so far and then we're like, actually it might be helpful to go back and revisit this earlier principle just to make sure it's really fully sunk in.
So second principle is honor your hunger.
Yeah.
Discuss.
Yeah, so I always like to do a little thought experiment here. So I want the listeners / viewers, which is creepy, but okay. I want you to think about whether you have ever tried to ignore or pacify your hunger signals by drinking a Diet Coke, or having a cup of coffee, or
mine was sparkling water.
Or a cigarette, or going to bed early, or just flat ignoring it and hoping that it goes away.
Yeah, I think, everyone in the room is nodding their head.
Yeah. So that is not honoring your hunger. That is just ignoring it. And what that can do is it atrophies the signals in our bodies around hunger. So they become sort of weaker and less reliable over time. So literally the other day a client was saying, oh, if I just don't eat for a while, then eventually the hunger goes away. And I'm like, well, but do you know what's happening in your body when that happens? And she wasn't sure. And so I explained to her that, well, basically your body realizes that by sending out those signals, you're not responding to them or registering it. So it's just going to cut them off. It's just going to stop sending your body those signals. And I don't know, I find that quite a a sort of uncomfortable realization that your body would just stop functioning the way that it's meant to, that in a normal way. So honoring your hunger is about learning that your body is sending you a message for a reason, and to learn to eat in accordance with those sort of gentle signals for hunger, rather than waiting until you get like
the rumbling
way past hungry, which that sets you up to feel again out of control around food. It might send, if you're vulnerable to it, it might send you up for binging, and I don't mean that in a ooh, I ate 3 cookies out of a packet kind of way. I mean it in the sense of you ate 3 packets of biscuits and then maybe something else as well as that. So in the real true sense of binging and binge eating disorder. So that's something else to consider. So yeah, learning to tune into your early hunger signals, which essentially helps you build trust in your body. And actually some research is showing that it can support physical health as well. So it can help you manage blood glucose levels a bit better, for instance. So yeah, that's honoring your hunger.
Should we just, because I just have a few examples of my own, and I think you have examples from clinic.
Tons.
of things that are hunger, but we might not think they're hunger because it's not like an outrageous rumbling belly. Mine is, I stopped being able to form sentences, and I literally just, I'm like my batteries have died, and I just have to, I literally have to refuel to them. I've been doing a lot of writing recently and talking to people, and I really noticed that when I'm hungry, I don't think clearly at all.
Yeah.
And I might not in that moment think, wow, I'm hungry, because I feel a little bit hungry right now, but I wouldn't necessarily feel that, but I'm like, I'm not thinking straight, and I'm a bit low energy. I need food.
Yes, so oftentimes when I ask clients, what does hunger feel like for you in your body, they will just describe like this deep gnawing at the pit of their belly, and I'm like, whoa, that sounds like you're probably over hungry. And it's almost always just the symptoms in their stomach that they're listening out for. When what we talk about in clinic are the 5 ways that hunger can show up. So it could be mood, so getting hangry, but also really interestingly, some of my clients experience anxiety when they're hungry.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that's something else to be aware of. But any kind of dip in your mood, that might be a symptom. So mood, then head, so could be concentration, could be focus, could be just kind of like a dull, slight headache. And what I think a lot of people don't appreciate is that that if we let our blood sugar level get too low, it can trigger migraines. So that's something to kind of be aware of as well. If you're susceptible to migraines, making sure that you're checking in with these earlier symptoms of hunger rather than waiting until you're over hungry. So mood, head, energy levels. So if you're feeling just kind of weak and listless and blah, and even if you have had a good night's sleep, then that could be a symptom of hunger or signal of hunger. And then there are the physical symptoms, so stomach, but noticing those more nuanced signs around hunger, so like a gentle rumbling rather than like a full-blown.
Yeah,
Did you like my stomach
that was actually
impression?
very good. You've done this before.
I just found a new talent. And then the last one is physical, so feeling like you have low blood sugar, feeling kind of weak. All of those things could be signals of hunger. So it might take a little bit of experimenting to figure out exactly what hunger feels like for you. And of course, you know, for some people, one of those signals on its own might mean hunger. For other people, it might be kind of figuring out a combination of a few of those. So yeah, play around with it. But like in the Intuitive Eating book and in my book, we both go into a lot of detail about how you can figure that out.
Yes, and one thing we did include in Train Happy was the hunger fullness scale.
Yes.
So people can start to identify where they're at on there.
Yeah.
Which is
One
interesting.
thing I would say about that though, and this is something I have to always warn my clients about, is that if you're not focused, if you're not I guess what I'm trying to say is focus on the hunger side of the equation first, because without that, without having that piece in place, and then some of the other principles that we're just about to talk about, that fullness side of the equation rarely falls into place if you still perceive the threat of future deprivation to be quite high. So if you're still restricting, if you're still not allowing yourself to eat the foods that you really like and enjoy, then we could see people overshooting their fullness regularly on the other side of the equation.
Very helpful, very helpful. So we've got the next one, which is making peace with food. I think this is my favourite one.
Why is it your favourite one?
Because I demonise so many things for a long time, and so it's just really, really nice to know that all foods fit and they have a place, and to not have that guilt and shame around eating food. That is so liberating.
What was that process like for you?
It was so prior to intuitive eating and just generally realising that I needed to get a better place with food, I really had to challenge a lot of rules I had. So for example, like portion control around peanut butter, I only let myself have a certain amount, and like so I'd slowly just let myself have a little bit more and be like, oh, like nothing happened. Or I'd I'd have to, I'm thinking like I'd make my breakfast in the morning, and I used to like, even if I wasn't weighing my food, I would know the perfect portion that I felt was appropriate, and I would just slightly overdo it in terms of like, oh, I'll just pour, oh, there's a bit more, and just try and see what that felt like. See what it felt like to not abide my own rules, basically, and just push the boundaries, and put myself in positions, which was scary, but put myself in positions where I'm going out for dinner, or I'm particularly with my boyfriend's family, and know that I have no control over what food is about to be presented to me, and I have to eat it. And that was I've been with him since the kind of depths of my disordered eating to now, and I'm probably a completely different person, but noticing, we're still eating the same roast dinner that we've had for the last 5.5 years, but my interaction with that roast dinner is completely different to what it was, 5 years ago to what it is now. And just noticing my language around how I described food, not saying things were good or bad, and recognizing that everything had its role, and eating vegetables doesn't make me a better person than choosing to just eat like, I don't know, a plain pasta dish. Like, those are both okay, and that was that's been huge.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that this is your favourite principle, because for some people it's
the hardest, I imagine.
One.
And I get that, but I feel like in a really fortunate position where it was scary a couple of years ago, and now it's...
But on the other side of it...
On the other side, it's good.
Yeah, it's worth it's worth persevering and pushing through if you can. Yeah. I think I talk as a sort of stepping stone on the way to making peace with food and giving yourself unconditional permission to eat. I talk about this concept of food neutrality. So noticing the language, like you said, that you use around food, and kind of, instead of referring to things as healthy or unhealthy or good, bad, or making these dichotomies around food, if you can just call food by its name. So like, this is a snack, or this is a dessert, or this is a vegetable, or this is dairy, or whatever it is that you're talking about, that can be a really simple, accessible way of bringing food down off of a pedestal, because I don't think we said this explicitly, but when we label foods in a certain way, or treat certain foods as though they're special somehow, that's when they hold more power over us, and they feel like they're kind of like calling our name. So the forbidden fruit effect can mean that we end up eating way more of that food than is comfortable for us, or we feel loads of guilt and shame and have lots of negative self-judgment around it when we do eat it.
I was talking to a friend recently, and they said that they had a sugar addiction. And it was a really interesting chat, because it as you said, it was kind of that thing where they felt really bad for eating sugar, and they said, oh, because when I eat it I can't stop, and it was really interesting to just kind of hear their experience, because I think they'd labelled that food bad.
Yeah.
It felt like that if they weren't going to get it again, they just had to go for it in that moment.
Yeah.
And do you think that's where that phrase has come up? It's become a bit of a thing to be a sugar addict.
Yeah, and certainly I feel for people who relate to food in that way, where it feels very much like a compulsion or an addiction, and you feel like you can't stop. The first thing that I would say is if you do find yourself binging in the true sense of the word binging, so not just eating 3 or 4 biscuits, but 3 or 4 packets of biscuits, then seek out professional help, because that could be a symptom of bulimia or binge eating disorder. So definitely look into that. But if you are more on the side of, oh, I just get a little bit excited and carried away with, I don't know, ice cream or chocolate or whatever it is, then sometimes, and I see this time and time again in clinic, the root of that sort of, in quotes, addiction is actually down to restricting it and not giving yourself permission to eat those foods. And so if you find yourself in that position, then I think intuitive eating can be a really helpful framework for you to work through this concept of food addiction, which we know is not supported by the scientific literature, so we don't actually have the capacity, like our biology doesn't have the capacity to be addicted to sugar in the same way that you're addicted to heroin or cocaine or something. And oftentimes you'll read things in the media where it's like, sugar lights up your brain the same way that...
Oh, it's that drug.
Whichever drug, like they'll say some drug.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And I'm like, but your brain lights up in response to a lot of things that are, like kittens or your favorite music or your favorite people. And so we need to be careful not to over-pathologize our brains lighting up, because that's, again, a survival evolutionary mechanism. If we didn't get excited about like food and sex, we would just die off as a species.
True, very true. So the next one is challenge the food police, which kind of links nicely.
Yeah, these two I kind of feel like are just an extension of each other. So challenging the food police would be a lot to do with challenging the rhetoric that's out there about good and bad foods, for example, and challenging this idea that there is such a thing as a perfect diet, because there isn't. And what we know from a nutrition perspective is the most important things are sort of balance and variety over time, rather than this one specific perfect food or meal that doesn't exist.
So no superfoods.
Yeah, no, that's just branding and PR.
Yeah,
that's
not a magic cure-all. It has to be, like you said, over time.
No, I mean pizza is pretty super.
Yeah.
But it's not going to cure any diseases. So yeah, I think kind of pushing back on all of the sort of quote unquote advice that we get about nutrition and what's good for you and what's not, and being able to kind of come to your own conclusion about those things.
Doesn't that feel like an odd thing to say as a nutritionist? To say, don't listen to rules around food?
Yeah, I can see how that's weird. I guess I'm so used to saying it at this point that it doesn't seem weird, but I can see how that comes across as weird. But I see so many people who have misconstrued what and I'm even hesitant to use the term good nutrition means, because it's usually so devoid of context, and people don't really appreciate nuance with nutrition, and there are no black and whites when it comes to nutrition. Everything is needs to be taken into context, and it's very individualized. So what kind of works for one person is not going to necessarily work for the next person. And I think that's what's so great about intuitive eating, is that you can kind of take it and make it your own, and it doesn't, like, intuitive eating for you is going to look different for intuitive eating for me.
Absolutely. And I think, like you said, there's certain principles that may speak to you at some points, or that you may really feel like there were certain things for me that really clicked, and other ones where that, I don't know, that wasn't so, it wasn't such a process to kind of to work with.
Yeah. Some people, I think, just take to some of the principles really easily, and then there are a few other ones that they just need to spend a little bit more time with.
So the next one is discover the satisfaction factor.
Yeah, I really love working with clients around this principle, because it can be really fun, and we can do some really practical things. Like, I remember a client telling me once that they hadn't been to the supermarket shopping, like they just done all their supermarket shops online for like 2 years, and they just bought the same ingredients every single week to like make a smoothie or make, you know, they basically eat the same thing, which was very much informed by diet culture and their understanding of what a good diet is. And so her homework was to like go to a market. I think I sent her to Borough Market and told her to like smell the cheese and like, you know, touch the like fresh produce and like try some fresh baked bread. And so discovering, that's exactly what Discover the Satisfaction Factor is. It's about rejecting what you think you should eat because diet culture tells you to, and learning to eat the foods that are going to give you the most sort of bang for your buck when it comes to satisfaction. So yeah, doing stuff like that and really learning what fills you up, what satisfies you, what makes you feel content. So it could be thinking through the textures and the flavors and the colors on your plate. And sort of, I think it's really important to caveat this as well and say, on the flip side of things, recognizing that not every meal is perfect, not every meal can be perfect, but you know, sometimes you just need to have like beans on toast with cheese and get something on the table.
Sometimes.
But I get it. Like it's delicious and it's comforting, and sometimes that is really what you're craving and what you're after. And other times that has to happen because of necessity, right? So, that, like, I also, when I'm working with this principle, will integrate concepts around mindful eating as well. So really tuning into the different textures, temperatures, flavors. You know, do you like sweet, salty, umami, all of those different things? And you can have a lot of fun with it.
Do you follow Tiffany Rowe online? And
yeah, of course. Who doesn't follow Tiffany Rowe?
I'm obsessed with her, and her husband does this thing saying like, "What do you want to eat?" They say like, "What do you want to eat?" And he's like, "I want sticky, sweet, gooey," and then he like lists all these descriptive words, and then they try and make something that encompasses those things, and it's so fun. It just is like that. It's like. It feels so playful, and like they make it really just a fun thing to do, and I think she calls it like the T Rowe method or something like that, and I love it. I think it's so fun.
I mean, and that's the thing, like food should be fun. It should not be a battleground. It's there to be enjoyed, and the more we enjoy our food, the more likely we are to have a healthy relationship with it. Side note, my husband, only like when he's hungry, he will just tell me what number he is on.
Oh really? I love that you've got him to that point.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a 7, it's getting bad. Like, no, sorry, I'm a 3, I'm a 2.
I need to eat now.
I need to do a bit of food shopping, and you know, when you look at my cup, it's like this, like I am not satisfied. Like I am not satisfied. I know I need more food, and I'm really frustrated that I haven't prepared myself enough to get to the shops to do stuff. I've just had so much going on recently, and it's also realizing for me as well, this satisfaction thing is realizing when I'm not satisfied and making sure that I do, you know, even if what to some would feel like an adequate meal doesn't satisfy me, like that's okay, and like if I need more, and that's an individual need.
And sometimes, and I think this is what's so helpful about doing the work around discovering the satisfaction factor, is that sometimes it's not necessarily that you need a lot more food. It might be that you need, you might need to discover for what for you makes the difference between being full and being satisfied. Is that having something sweet at the end of your meal? Is that having something crunchy, or different textures, or whatever it might be? But that's what that concept allows you to explore, so that when you come to the next principle, which is, I believe, it's gonna look
Feel
really,
your fullness.
yes, that's what I thought. So it's feeling your fullness. If you haven't done all that earlier work around, making peace with food, challenging the food police, and doing this work around connecting with what fills you and satisfies you, then there's just no way that you're going to be able to regularly feel your fullness. So don't skip those steps. Really sink into them, because otherwise this other part of the equation, I think, just doesn't make sense.
Do you feel like discover the satisfaction factor and feel your fullness interlink as well in the same way that the other ones did?
I mean, yeah, I think Elise and Evelyn have just built such a beautiful model that it all kind of
It flows
into each other. And that's not to say that you have to follow them perfectly in order, but I think there is a lot of sense to the way that they present them.
So we have cope with your emotions with kindness, which I believe is the new terminology for this principle.
Yeah, I love that sort of reframing of it, because I called it, when I'm working with clients, I use the phrase understanding emotional eating, because emotional eating gets such a bad rap. It gets vilified so heavily, when actually it's just a way that we have of looking after ourselves and coping with difficult feelings. And I just want to point out that it's totally human and, normal. I hesitated using that word, but it's really normal to use food to pacify difficult feelings. And if we think about, when babies are born and they're bawling their heads off, the first thing that we do is offer them a boob or a bottle, right? So we give them something to eat. And then throughout life, food is intrinsically linked with emotion, whether that's, joy and celebration, or commiseration and I've just been dumped, right? Like, it's the full spectrum of things. Weddings, funerals, birthdays, breakups, like there's always food there. So I think we really need to take the sting out of the concept of emotional eating, and think about what function it has served from us, and then come at understanding emotional eating from a much more compassionate place, and then kind of tapping into, okay, what other coping skills are available to us. I often talk about our sort of emotional coping toolkit, and sometimes food is the only thing in there. So if I were to go in and yank that out and take that away from you, then there's nothing left in there potentially. So what can we add to that rather than take away from that toolkit? And so, we have a worksheet around emotional eating where we talk about different things that you can do to help basically self-soothe, like a sort of self-care checklist kind of thing. And I will encourage my clients to leave food on there as, one or two of the options, so that that's not, again, normal. But you know what I mean?
That's okay.
That's an option for you, as well as maybe, whatever else is helpful for you, whether that's like, lying on the floor and grounding yourself, or calling a friend, or, if you have going to therapy, if that's accessible to you, or
journaling,
like
that.
Yeah, and that's not to say that some people may have difficulties around food that don't need professional help, but there are these kind of low-level self-soothing, self-care techniques that we can fill our coping toolkit with.
I love that. And in Train Happy, I kind of reflected that with exercise and said how we often use exercise to cope, and for some people,
for sure,
working out is their only way of coping with emotion. And my therapist put it as often we're kind of running away from dealing with that hard stuff because it's really, really hard to deal with. And so that is the way to kind of just, deal with it in that moment. And as you said, it's about adding in rather than having just one crutch, and giving yourself the option to perhaps exercise, or food has its place in soothing you, but can there be other ways as well?
Yeah, and I think it's really important to mention that sometimes when we go through the work of intuitive eating and realise that food is not the problem, we've just been kind of putting a lot of stuff onto food, we have to learn new ways of looking after ourselves, because sometimes all the shit can rise to the surface.
Mm-hmm.
That's not, I don't want to scare people off by saying that, but I think it is helpful to kind of have that heads up that you're probably going to have to find new ways of looking after yourself.
Yeah. Speaking from personal experience, like that's 100% mine, and also realizing that at a time in my life, so early in my 20s, when I'd had a pretty traumatic event in my teens. I lost my dad, and I was at drama school in a really tumultuous environment that at times felt totally out of my control. Looking inwards at food and my body and everything was my way of coping.
Yeah.
And it was disordered, but it was a coping mechanism. And realizing that is hard, and you get frustrated and you feel, but I also think I was doing my best with what I had at the time.
Oh, yeah.
And it's got me to where I am now. And, I'm really fortunate that I am in a position now where I can get access to other help and realize this stuff. But we're all just trying to cope the best we know how. And, whether it's exercise, whether it's food, that's what you've learnt is the way to cope. And it is about getting to the deeper stuff, and that's the hardest job of all, I think.
Yeah, it definitely is, but I think, as you've sort of alluded to already, and certainly, one of the things that my clients say anecdotally to me is even though it's a hard process to go through, ultimately being able to connect with your life in a way that doesn't revolve around food and body preoccupation is a worthwhile place to get to. 150%.
150%. I would not be sat here having this conversation without going through that process, because I didn't have the headspace for this conversation. Yeah. And that was huge. So when you spoke earlier about the brain, I was like, totally can relate. So let's move on to respect your body. Another great principle.
Yeah. And another tricky one that can be challenging for people, again, in the context of diet culture and just a pandemic of body shame and body hate that we sort of live in. So the way that I frame this in my book is talking about the concept of body neutrality. So sometimes it's difficult for people to feel like they can go from totally hating their body to totally loving their body in like one foul swoop. So we talk about this stepping stone of body neutrality, where you basically are learning to treat your body with respect, irrespective of what you've eaten or how much you've exercised a particular way. So it could be really, really low-key things like, buying clothes that fit and don't dig or pinch into you, which sounds so obvious, but we're so reticent to allow, to give ourselves that.
It's just taking up more space.
Yeah.
And even if I'm just taking up space inside material.
Yeah.
Like that feels like scary.
Yeah.
That's like, this is an unknown thing. This is new. Yeah. And it feels like I had my book launch last week, and I bought a dress that's my usual size. It didn't fit, so I had to get the next size up.
But learning that's a reflection of the culture that we live in, not a failing of your body.
No, and for me it was just a case of, there's like that. I was talking to someone saying that voice in your head goes from like you know, it might be a 50% to a 40 to a 30 to a 20 to 10,
Yeah.
and then there's still that maybe 0.5% in your brain that goes, hang on a second, a bigger size, and you're like, and then it's having that awareness of going, wait, I know that voice, I know what that is. Let's like, it's okay, it's okay, and just being kind to yourself for thinking that thought, because those thoughts do crop up, I think, when it comes to your body, and maybe it changes. And giving yourself a lot of compassion, I think, has been also really important to say, like, I get why you feel that way, like, I get it, but you know, like, you the diet voice, like, it's hard to mute it totally.
Yeah.
It will get dimmed down and dimmed down and dimmed down.
Absolutely. But you can choose not to engage with
Yes.
it. And a couple of things that I think are important on the back of that. First of all, this idea that I talk to my clients about all the time, which is body image fluctuates and changes. So I think sometimes we can get this kind of misconception that being body positive is about reaching this like body nirvana place where you just love yourself all the time and you never have a bad body image day, and that's totally not what it is. But it's about being able to respond to those inevitable bad body image days with self-compassion, right? That's essentially what it boils down to. And also understanding and learning about, and I think this is so critical, and I'm willing to put money on the fact that Elise and Evelyn have written about this in the 4th edition of their book, and I know other people have too, and people can speak to it much more eloquently than I can, but is really including or really learning about the true intentions behind body positivity, which go back to what we were talking about at the beginning. It was a social justice movement designed for the inclusion of marginalized bodies, not just fat bodies, but I think all marginalized bodies, but especially fat bodies. And so learning about the fat liberation roots of body positivity, and if you can kind of tap into that from a social justice perspective, I think that's really critical in that body image healing piece of work.
Yeah, absolutely. And we touched on that in Train Happy as well, and spoke about, we had Anushka Rees, who wrote Beyond Beautiful, which I think is such a lovely book in helping you kind of navigate how you feel about body image. And she talks about body neutrality in there, and we talk about the differentiations, and I hope that gets people curious on how it fits into intuitive eating as well. It's all kind of, this is all interlinked stuff, interwoven stuff. So we also have movement, Feel the Difference. And this is where...
It's where you come in.
This is where,
You tell us what this is.
Well, we've had it described as joyful movement, I think, quite commonly. And it absolutely is about finding fun and play in movement again. I think for many people who are going through intuitive eating, perhaps exercise has always been linked to dieting. Mm-hmm. So when they exercise, they restrict, and vice versa. So I think it's, once you've done the work of kind of unlearning that sense of restriction, I think, and you can start to bring movement back in. And I say get it back on your own terms and disconnect it from diet culture, and realize that it can be about just feeling really good, and a change to your body does not have to be the gauge for success. It doesn't have to be the measurement. There doesn't have to be a measurement for success. It can just be about you in your body doing what feels good. And it doesn't have to be the exercise rules as prescribed by diet culture. It doesn't have to be in a gym. It can be in the park. It can be, I don't know, doing rock climbing or ice skating or horse riding, or you can go anywhere and everywhere and move your body. And I like to use, I've heard you speak about this as well, because I think the phrase exercise has this connotation of repetitive movement that feels, for some, punishment,
punitive.
And whilst I think some people may relate to that, it doesn't always have this connotation to people. I do think that movement is even though on the front of the book it says intuitive exercise for everybody, I wish it said intuitive movement for everybody. I think because I want,
Yeah, but you need to shift those books, Tally.
yeah,
so.
yeah. But I want people to kind of get out the box,
Yeah.
think outside the box, and kind of do stuff they enjoy doing. So, how do you see it playing out in clinic? How do you see this working with people?
I was actually just thinking about my own recent experience, if I may.
Please.
But I am 5 months pregnant, and I've been having a lot of hip pain and difficulties, and I've been to see the women's physio. That was an interesting experience that I wasn't expecting. Anyone who's been pregnant will understand. I just wasn't able to. I haven't been able to find anything that really was alleviating the pressure. And then I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go for a swim.
Yeah.
And I live pretty close to London Fields, Lido, which is it Lido or Lido?
I think it's Lido, but you can say Lido. Lido.
It's either way, it feels awkward. But anyway, so it's an outdoor swimming pool, and I've been going just a couple of times a week and doing I've been giving myself permission to go in the super, super slow lane with all the over 65s, and I've grabbed a hold of the paddle board, the floaty. What's the float? The float. Just kicking my legs about, and yeah, it's brought so much relief for my hips. But had that been, I don't know, how back in the day I would have felt so self-conscious about going into a swimming pool and getting half undressed and all of that kind of stuff, and here's me with my belly out and just jumping in the pool. So that's been a really nice way to reconnect with my body as it's going through some very weird changes at the moment.
I started swimming as well. I've been doing proper swimming lessons, so I can swim front pool because I started
now you're
swim
just
to survive.
off.
No, I've had 6 lessons, and this has become my new thing. I really enjoy doing it because it's very mindful for me. This is my joy in exercise because I can't look at my phone. I can't look at my phone.
Yeah.
No one talks to me. I don't have to talk to anyone else. I just have to focus on my breathing, and I'm just it's like a little challenge, and I feel really accomplished for learning a new skill. Before my 30th birthday, I feel really good about that. I'm like, I did that. And recently I managed to do 2 lengths in a row without dying. So that was really great. That's a progression from doing
unlocked.
1 length. Yeah, but for me that feels so fun because as a personal trainer and someone who's worked in a gym for a long time and trained in a very specific way for a long time, letting myself do something that is just about learning a new skill and is not with the intention of getting mega fit or having to get this new PB. It's about small, slow progressions and learning a new technique has been really
and also
challenging and fun.
And also just kind of on that, it's been really interesting for me to see as well, I'm doing this exercise movement that I hadn't been doing before, and having the intuitive eating skills to be able to be actually, I've just done that workout and I feel wiped and I need to go and eat I need an extra snack to help with the fact that I've just burned off all of that energy. So it's less about the compensation piece that we were talking about before and more about, okay, how can I adequately nourish my body for this movement that I'm doing?
Yes, definitely. Because you want to have the best energy you can to do something that you really enjoy. I think, talking about that self-care toolbox earlier, exercise movement can be a beautiful tool of self-care when you're coming at it with the respect and when you're coming at it with that mindset. It's the mindset shift that's really hard, but when it is that, it's all about making sure that, you're not doing it on a body that's lacking loads of sleep, and you're adequately fueled and all this kind of stuff, and that surrounds that self-care, that use of exercise as self-care.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's finish with the last one, which is gentle nutrition, honouring your body with gentle nutrition. Because I think the common misconception with intuitive eating is that it disregards any form of nutrition, and it's just eat what you want, when you want, how you want. A very skeptical, I think, view of intuitive eating is like you just eat what you want and that's it. But there obviously is a nutrition element involved.
Well, and I would argue that it's all nutrition.
Yeah.
Like learning to recognize your body's hunger signals, learning to eat the foods that satisfy you and fuel you and make you feel well, that's all nutrition. So, if we are only thinking of nutrition in terms of this food will make you healthy, this food will make you unhealthy, which is a false dichotomy anyway, then that just, to me, that is showing us how narrow we perceive, our perceptions of nutrition are, and we need to kind of widen that out a lot more. I would also say we need to widen our definition and understanding of health and what that means and what that looks like, and recognize that that's different for different people, and our ability to achieve health will depend on loads and loads of variables, and it's not a moral obligation, right? We could. I'll rein myself in on that.
Another episode, Laura.
A whole other conversation. But the crux of gentle nutrition kind of comes back to how we can support our health, if that's what we're going for, through a sort of more a gentler approach to nutrition. So one that isn't all or nothing, black or white, based on cutting things out and losing weight and restricting yourself. Instead, it's based on what you might add into your diet, or what you might, kind of achieving balance and variety over time, rather than kind of micromanaging every single meal that you eat to be kind of perfect.
Yeah.
And gentle nutrition and honoring your health are also weight inclusive and kind of incorporate some of these elements of health at every size. So I'm helping support people's health regardless of the size of their body. And the bodies might change throughout the process of doing intuitive eating. Weight can go up, it might go down, it might stay the same. But regardless, we are kind of focused on improving health outcomes, and not even like hard measurable outcomes, but just how people feel in themselves. So it might be more of a subjective feeling.
And it's worth saying at this point, though, even though we're saying how you feel, but it is worth saying that I believe there are, if not almost over 100 studies on intuitive eating in practice, and it is now like an evidence-based what's the word? Framework
Yeah.
that people use, and that it is shown to have positive benefits to people's, like you said, their overall health outcomes.
Yeah, and not just physical health outcomes, but there's a lot of evidence. I think that the strongest evidence that I've seen is more around psychological well-being and health, and we certainly need more studies and longer-term studies and randomized controlled trials around intuitive eating. But the sort of preliminary evidence base that we have so far is really promising, and we have to remember as well that Evelyn and Elise developed the model from the existing evidence base went way back when, in like 1995, but it's so cool to see some of the research that has evolved around the current framework as it stands.
It is, and it's lovely to see. Evelyn is quite big on social media, so you must
huge,
give her a follow. She's one of my favourite people to follow. She just has the most positive energy.
She's so generous with her energy as well.
And still so excited 25 years later to be talking about this, and still has so much to say.
She's so psyched.
And it's just lovely to see. I really aspire to have the same energy about fitness in like 25 years time.
I aspire to have that energy now. I need a nap after this.
She's fantastic. And going back to a point about gentle nutrition, I just wanted to talk a few examples in application, in terms of, in my mind I see gentle nutrition as thinking, oh, I need a snack I know I tend to go to work in the evenings and then come home.
Yeah.
So thinking, oh, what's going to keep me full and energized and focused? And so while thinking what's going to satisfy me, what do I like, what food do I have in my cupboard, making a decision that thinking, okay, well I know this will give me a balanced meal of proteins, carbs and fats that will keep me going.
Yes.
That will, so I always think, and I've heard you say this before, and I noticed I had them in my cupboard, hummus and oat cakes. They're a really great one, just to keep you going. I was like, I know this is going to keep me going. I can come home and make dinner.
And again, just drawing on my own recent experiences, another example of gentle nutrition for me was in my first trimester when I could not stomach anything that was not a white carb. Being kind with myself and sort of recognizing, okay, white carbohydrate or white flour in this country is fortified with calcium and iron and niacin and thiamine, B1. Just a little test of my nutrition knowledge there. And actually, it's not devoid of nutrition as we often think about in relation to white carbohydrates. I went through like a real crumpet phase for a while.
I love a crumpet.
But I was adding my toppings to make it as balanced as I could with, under the circumstances which were that I mostly wanted to puke my guts up. And it was so interesting for me actually that one day, kind of after eating a lot of crumpets for a while, I was like, I really want a green curry with loads of veggies in it. And it was, it was quite interesting for me to sort of almost experience something that maybe clients go through quite a lot when they're going through the intuitive eating process. I still had it with white rice, but it was kind of, I could really tell that my body was asking or kind of telling me actually, okay, now it's time we need to get back on those veggies.
Yeah.
So it does happen.
And it's really interesting that like all of these needs that we'll have, like nutritional needs that our body is telling us will evolve and change as we go through different stages of life, and like whether that is, through pregnancy or whether that is, even going into things like menopause or something like that. I just think that all these things, our body will kind of, it wants to work with us if we let it and if we trust it, and I think that's the most important thing. So I think I've got like 2 tiny little questions. I'm just conscious of your time, but perhaps this is a big question, perhaps this is a small question. I'll let you decide. Do you think intuitive eating is for everyone?
That's a big question.
It is a big question.
It is a big question. Yes and no. So, for instance, I work a lot with eating disorders, and I'm actually currently involved in a project where we are integrating intuitive eating principles into an NHS service towards the later stages of eating disorder recovery. But I would not say that the full expression of intuitive eating is not appropriate in the early stages of eating disorder recovery. I will caveat that by saying you can beginning to teach people about rejecting the diet mentality and challenging the food police, and all of these things are really, really, really helpful. But when our sort of hunger and fullness meters are off, then that might not be appropriate. Mm-hmm. So if you are, if you're in recovery from an eating disorder, you can use intuitive eating, but it really requires some additional support if you can access that. Let's see.
Would that also apply to others who are, working with a dietitian medically through managing various conditions? I suppose it depends on the condition and depends.
It really depends on the condition. So one of the things that we're working on here at LCIE at the moment is developing a set of practice guidelines for clinicians, so dietitians, nutritionists, doctors, nurses, other healthcare professionals. So basically we're taking evidence-based guidelines and kind of filtering them through this non-diet intuitive eating lens and then, you know, training professionals around it. And we've developed these really beautiful resources. I wish I had one handy to show you. These great resources which we are ultimately going to be selling to the general public so that they can take them to their healthcare provider. Amazing. And say, okay, I have NAFLD, I have PCOS, I have IBS, various other conditions that I want to treat through a weight inclusive, intuitive eating informed lens. So those are kind of, we've got a couple out. I think by the time this podcast comes out, we'll have the PCOS one out as well. So I can give you the links to those. And yeah, we're kind of on a mission to help educate other professionals so that they, you know, don't dismiss their clients and be like, well, no, you have insulin resistance, you have to go on a low carb diet. That's not the case, and if anyone tells you that, then you should challenge them / come and see us. But yeah, so we want to educate clients, we want to educate clinicians, but we also want to empower people to look after their health through this weight inclusive lens. That said, if you are being, let's say, fed with a nasogastric tube or a PEG or something else where you're accessing your nutrition artificially, then probably intuitive eating is not going to be appropriate because you have really complex medical needs. So something like that, that's not going to be appropriate. Trying to think of any other things. I would always say as well that if you're working with an experienced professional who understands these principles really well, they can help you adapt them, and certainly, you know, everyone could probably benefit from ditching the diet mentality and learning about their hunger cues if those are available to them, and you know, learning about body respect and these other things. So again, it's about maybe adapting the model and taking the bits and pieces from it that you might need.
Tailoring it to the individual.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Now, intuitive eating, because it is gaining popularity, is starting to get a bit co-opted by diet culture and is becoming the hunger fullness diet. And people like, my understanding is that when we measure success with intuitive eating with the outcome being weight loss, that's when it starts to slip into that diet territory. So
Correct.
how do we just have like a bit of awareness as to when it's a diet and when it's true intuitive eating?
Yeah, I think if it's attached to the promise of weight loss, that's a big red flag for me. If it is, you know, something like intermittent fasting and intuitive eating, or macro counting and intuitive eating, red flag, run away. Mm-hmm. That's not intuitive eating. If there are kind of restrictions on what, when, or how much you can eat, that to me signifies that it's a diet as opposed to intuitive eating. So yeah, that would be my kind of like quick distillation. Do you have anything else you would?
Well, I thought I was eating intuitively for a long time, because my understanding was, and the terminology was used in the fitness space, that if you weren't actively tracking food, so if you weren't actively tracking macros or calories in MyFitnessPal, you were eating intuitively, and that's a common phrase that was kind of described
Okay.
But so even in that mindset, even if you're not actively, so for a very long time I didn't actively track food, but I had very much had rigid diet rules around what I could and couldn't eat. So whilst I would say yes, I'm eating intuitively because I wasn't following a plan and I wasn't tracking and I didn't have calorie goals, I still was implementing diet rules, and I was still coming from the diet mentality with the way I ate food.
Yeah, and
I think that's really common.
It's really common, and I can totally understand why, especially in the fitness space where the messages around intuitive eating are so misconstrued, and it's kind of a mess in there, but sorry. I mean, we have our own stuff to clean up in the nutrition world as well, but there's a sort of assumption that if you're no longer dieting, then you're eating intuitively. And a lot of people forget that there's a framework, there's a process that you work through. Yes, the theory is that we're born with this innate ability to eat intuitively, and most of us are, but that gets eroded over time. So we actually have to work. It gets eroded over time through, diets and diet culture, and even like well-intentioned but ultimately unhelpful things that our parents say to us when we're kids.
Like finish your plate, before you get up on the table. That was one of my
eat your vegetables, or you can't go to the cinema, or whatever it might be. So we're taught from a very young age that there's this kind of like bargaining that goes on around food, or it gets used as a treat or a reward, and so it can get complicated from a very young age. And then you've got all the stuff with diet culture and just messages around the thin ideal, and etc. etc. So yeah, by the time that you stop dieting, you've still got all of this stuff that you need to kind of unlearn and sift through and unpack, and that's where the intuitive eating framework can help you get back to a place. I always joke with my clients that my job is to make myself redundant, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm trying to teach them all the tools and skills that they will need so that they don't need to come and see a nutritionist anymore, right? And that's, what any good intuitive eating program should be aiming for.
Yes, it's giving you food freedom.
Exactly.
Laura, this has been a wonderful conversation. I felt like we covered so much.
I do, but I feel like we could still...
Oh, there's so much
more that we didn't say.
There's so much more to talk about.
These camera guys need to see.
I know, bless them. They've been standing the whole time.
And a beer.
Thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you, and where can they find your book, Just Eat It?
I mean, I basically live here. I'm hardly away from this place. So I'm director of the London Centre for Intuitive Eating, and my team and I see people for nutrition counselling. Our website is londoncenterforintuitiveeating.co.uk. My podcast, which is sadly neglected at the moment, is Don't Salt My Game, but there's like 100+ episodes you can listen to. And you'll find me ranting about something on Instagram at Laura Thomas PhD.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, and congratulations on your book. It's so beautiful, and I know it's going to help so many people, so yeah.
Thank you for everyone listening, and we will see you next time. Goodbye.